She's non-compliant. The fine's now $250 per day. Dolores Penwright didn't flinch. One gloved hand on her HOA-issued clipboard, the other still brushing dust from the brand-new padlock she'd clicked shut around the railing. My wife, sat frozen in the medical recliner, one arm pinned to the iron post by a cold steel loop that didn't belong to any part of this neighborhood. "You chained my wife to our porch," I said slowly. "I secured a health hazard for community safety." "Read your bylaws," she smiled, and that was her mistake. "You should have Googled me first," I said, stepping forward. "I'm the new chief of police for Brookmeadow Township, which means you just unlawfully detained a disabled woman in front of a witness while impersonating a code enforcement officer, all of which is now under internal review." If you've ever felt that surge of power when standing up to bullies, hit subscribe now. This showdown is about to become a masterclass in fighting back. Dolores blinked, not in panic yet, but confusion. She looked down at the badge clipped to my hip, then at the porch camera that had caught her entire enforcement action. "You're bluffing?" I shook my head. "I took this job to spend more time with my wife. Moved into this HOA thinking peace and quiet would help her recover. But you turned our front porch into a war zone." I reached down to the lock, standard brass pad, nothing custom. She hadn't even noticed the thin rubber band around Lena's wrist under her sleeve, keeping the chain from digging into her healing skin. That chair, damn it, was supposed to be where Lena could breathe again. The porch recliner wasn't some lawn junk. It was a post-op recovery chair with pressure sensors and lumbar bracing, custom fitted after her L3 to L5 surgery. Our insurance had fought us on it. I'd fought harder. The chair let her feel the sun again, without risking a fall indoors. It let her sit upright when the pain meds wore off. It gave her back some small sliver of independence. And this morning, Dolores tried to weaponize it. A low whimper slipped from Lena's throat, barely audible behind her sunglasses. I saw the trembling in her hands long before Dolores noticed. "I'm right here," I said softly, crouching down and pulling out my multi-tool. Dolores took a step forward. "You are not authorized to—" "Don't." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The chain snapped open in 2 movements. I lifted Lena's arm gently, inspecting the skin. Red, but unbroken. She looked at me through her lashes. She said, "It was HOA policy." "It's not," I said. "It never was." I helped her inside, then came back out and closed the door behind me. Dolores hadn't moved, but her expression had changed. The power she thought she held was dissolving, and I wanted her to feel every second of it. "Your little sticker games, your made-up fines, your security cameras angled at our front door," I said. "You crossed the line the moment you treated my wife like property. And I promise you, this isn't going away quietly." She opened her mouth. I raised a finger. "You've been on notice since last week. 3 residents filed ADA grievances. 2 documented their interactions with you on camera, and now you've added unlawful restraint to the list." I paused, watching her face drain of color. "This is the part where you step off my porch. And pray your board has good insurance I didn't slam the door behind her. I didn't need to." Inside, Lena was curled on the recliner, silent. I sat beside her, not saying a word. The wind touched the curtains like a breath, lifting them briefly, revealing the backyard where we planted sunflowers last spring. They hadn't bloomed yet. Too much shade, too much concrete. This house wasn't home yet. Not until now. Because now, we were at war, and I had every intention of winning. "Where are you watching from?" Dolores didn't step off our porch so much as she floated, like nothing about what just happened would matter in the long run. That's what told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't her first overreach. It was just the first time someone told her no. That night, I reviewed the entire clip from our porch camera. It had captured every second. The way Dolores approached Lena like she was a trespasser, the dismissive tone, the chain. My stomach tightened every time I replayed it, especially the part where Lena tried to shift in the recliner and flinched when the links tugged at her wrist. The next morning, I stepped outside to grab the paper. A bright orange sticker had been slapped across the recliner's side. "Immediate violation, non-compliant structure, HOA code 4.3.2. Another fine, Another attempt to assert control. I peeled it off and tossed it in the trash. A few minutes later, the doorbell rang. A folded letter in a plastic sleeve hung from the knob. No knock, no signature. It was an escalated infraction notice. This one claiming Lena's recliner created an obstruction to visual harmony. What the hell did that even mean? I scanned the list of cited bylaws. Most were vague, subjective things about aesthetic compliance and community cohesion. But tucked into the margin in red ink was a new handwritten line. Chair must be removed within 24 hours, or enforcement action will resume. Enforcement. Like my wife was a code violation. I drove straight to the HOA office, half a mile from our house, buried inside the clubhouse near the tennis courts. The door was locked, blinds drawn. Not surprising, Dolores never worked out in the open. I rang the buzzer and waited. No answer. As I turned to leave, something caught my eye. A small sign taped to the window. It listed new security upgrades. Among them, porch-facing compliance cameras installed for all corner lots. Corner lots. That included us. I looked back at my house, from where I stood. Sure enough, a new bullet-style camera had been mounted to the lamppost at the end of our block. I hadn't seen it yesterday. I walked back home, slower this time, scanning every pole, tree, and roof corner. By the time I reached our lawn, I'd counted 5 additional cameras, none of which had existed 2 weeks ago when we moved in. Lena was waiting on the porch, chair repositioned to catch the morning sun. She had a blanket across her lap and earbuds in. When I approached, she opened her eyes, but didn't smile. She put a camera at the end of the street, she said quietly. I watched her do it. She had Trevor install it yesterday afternoon. While you were gone, Trevor Kane, the landscaper, quiet guy, built like a fence post, always in a faded long sleeve and straw hat. I'd seen him trimming the community hedges and pressure washing sidewalks. He worked fast, didn't talk much, never met my eyes. She had him install the chain too, Lena added. I looked at her. She was watching the sidewalk now, not me. He didn't want to do it, she whispered. He looked sick. He kept saying, "Are you sure?" She kept waving the clipboard in his face, and then he locked it. My jaw clenched. So Dolores hadn't acted alone. She'd used Trevor as her shield. If this thing went sideways, and it already had, she'd push the blame onto him. Say he misunderstood. Say she never told him to lock it. That was the play. I'd seen it before. Power structures always protect the top by sacrificing the quiet middle. I sat down on the top porch step and stared at the little blinking light on the new street cam. They'd pointed it right at us. Not the road, not the sidewalk, just us. This wasn't about rules anymore. It was about dominance, about humiliation, about control. And if Dolores thought she could quietly erase her mistake behind HOA bylaws and low-res footage, she'd misjudged who she was dealing with. I wasn't going to take this to a neighborhood meeting. I was going to take it to the state. I saw Trevor again 2 days later. He was parked at the edge of Willow Bend Circle, trimming the rose hedges around the mail kiosk, with electric shears that buzzed and kicked like they were too big for the job. His pickup was parked crooked, tailgate half down, buckets of mulch and a gas can rattling with every engine sputter. I didn't approach him at first, just watched. He kept his eyes down the whole time, cutting in short bursts, then stepping back like someone unsure if they wanted to finish the job or flee. The blade slipped once, nearly tearing through his glove. He hissed, yanked his hand back, and pulled the glove off slowly. No blood, but his fingers trembled. That's when I walked over. He heard me coming, boots crunching the gravel, but didn't look up. "Morning," I said. He nodded but didn't speak. "I'm Ethan." "We've met, sort of." "I know," he mumbled. His voice was low, worn out like the tread on his boots. He bent to grab another branch and trimmed it with quick, nervous snaps. I let the silence stretch. "You were here when my wife got chained," I said quietly. His shoulders tightened, but he didn't answer. "You were the one who fastened it." He paused mid-cut, just froze there, then stood up slowly, wiped the back of his neck with his forearm, and turned to face me. Eyes bloodshot, jaw clenched. "I didn't want to," he said. "I believe you. She said if I didn't do it, I'd be blacklisted from every property in the district. My contracts would vanish. Said I signed a clause about assisting with compliance installations." I nodded. "Did you?" I don't know, he said. I never read the small print. She waved a clipboard in my face, said it was temporary, said your wife would be inside in 10 minutes. He looked away again, jaw flexing. I heard your wife crying. That chair was shaking, his voice cracked. I wanted to stop, but I didn't. I could see the weight eating at him, slow and steady. Not a bad man, just someone Dolores had wrapped in liability and threat. A man who made himself small to survive. She's still shaking, Trevor, I said. At night, even in her sleep, he winced. I'm not here to hurt you, I added, but I need to know if you saw Dolores touch the chain. Give you orders, direct contact. He didn't answer right away, looked over at his truck like it might drive off without him. Then he said, she held the chain herself, wrapped it once, told me, make it look official. And then she handed me the lock. I exhaled slowly. That's enough. His eyes flicked to mine. Am I gonna be arrested? Not unless you lie on the record, I said. And even then, I'd rather you didn't bury yourself for someone who already used you once. He nodded, slow and hollow. I've got footage. That surprised me. I do side work for a house across the street from you. Installed a ring cam a week ago. Left it on for testing. Caught the whole porch scene. Audio's clear too. I blinked. You have that? He nodded again. Didn't know what to do with it. Figured it'd come back to me if I handed it over. She knows everybody on the board. I put a hand on his shoulder, not out of comfort, but out of recognition. The man had something that could break this case wide open, and he'd been sitting on it, scared, unsure who to trust. You bring that footage to me, I said, and I'll make sure your name's not the one in headlines. He looked down, then back up. I just want to work, he said. I don't want war. You already got drafted, Trevor. Question is, do you want out, or do you want justice? He didn't answer, but when I turned to walk away, I heard the shears click off behind me and the sound of a truck door opening. He wasn't ready. Yet. But I knew what guilt looked like when it was bending toward courage. I just had to be patient. The next violation notice was nailed, literally nailed, to our porch railing. It wasn't folded or sealed like the others. Dolores had used a roofing nail, punched straight through the center of the form, pinning it into the wood next to where Lena's chair usually sat. The paper fluttered slightly in the breeze, as if mocking the idea of civility. This time, the language was bolder. Final compliance enforcement, non-removal of unsafe object. Enforcement action will resume within 48 hours. Enforcement. That word again. I pulled the nail out with the back end of a hammer and took the paper inside. Lena watched me from the kitchen table, arms crossed tight over her chest. She came by this morning, she said. I turned. Did she say anything? She didn't need to. Just stood there at the curb, clipboard in hand, same smug smile, stayed for 5 minutes. Didn't blink once. The house felt smaller lately, not in size, but in silence. The way Lena walked slower, spoke softer, always keeping the curtains half drawn, like it might somehow stop Dolores's cameras from watching. I hadn't seen Dolores myself since the day of the chain, but her presence never really left. It lingered, in the warning stickers, in the neighbors' quick glances, in the carefully worded emails from the HOA board that never mentioned the word incident. They were hoping we'd forget, or fold. I had other plans. That night, I reviewed Trevor's footage. He'd delivered a thumb drive inside a plain envelope, slid under our door without a knock. The clip was rough but clear. Dolores, in full view, placing the chain around the chair's frame while Lena sat in it. Her mouth moved, no audio on that part. But then she handed Trevor the padlock, and you could hear her say, "Make it look official. They need to learn, need to learn." That's what she'd said. I backed the video up, watched again. Same words, same tone, same arrogance. And Trevor's hands, hesitant, shaky, obedient. I sent the file to my former ADA contact, Jacob Parr, who now worked in state compliance review. I didn't explain much, just asked him to watch and call me when he had a reaction. His reply came less than an hour later. "You've got civil rights violations, Ethan. ADA breach, possible criminal detainment, abuse of authority. This isn't a slap on the wrist situation." I knew it wasn't, but hearing someone else say it put new steel in my spine. 2 days later, the HOA newsletter arrived, digital and printed. The featured headline read, HOA to enforce community uniformity ahead of summer. Underneath, in smaller font, was a list of items now under increased scrutiny: patio furniture, porch decor, outdoor medical equipment, and any recovery-related installations visible from the street. They didn't name us, but they didn't have to. The language had Dolores written all over it. It was the board's way of insulating her, turning an isolated abuse into a vague, collective standard, make it sound routine, impersonal, as if the chair had been the problem all along. I printed out the newsletter and added it to my growing file. Every sticker, every fine, every warning, they were all dated and cataloged now. I had photographs of the lock, screenshots of the video, even archived emails from other residents who'd reported Dolores for similar overreaches. They never pushed hard, never had someone like me backing them. But now they did. That night, I watched Lena fall asleep with the blanket pulled up to her chin, recliner still locked in place beside the window. I sat across from her, arms folded, replaying the footage again on my laptop with the screen brightness low. She flinched in her sleep when Dolores's voice played. Even in dreams, the woman had reach. But she was about to learn what happened when she reached too far. Jacob called back the next morning, but this time his tone had changed. "I sent your file up the ladder," he said. "Didn't even take an hour before they kicked it over to the Attorney General's local review unit." "Fast," I said, "because it's serious. Chaining someone to a fixture, even if it was temporary, isn't just civil, that's detainment. The ADA doesn't play with this stuff. And if your wife's got a documented medical condition, Dolores is cooked." I sat at my desk, jaw tight, eyes flicking to the porch where Lena's chair sat like an unwanted shrine. It was quiet now, untouched, but not forgotten. Jacob continued, "Send me your formal statement today. Include every violation notice, every camera angle, and any records you've got from other residents. We're building a pattern here. That's what matters most." "I've got it all," I said. Organized, time-stamped, cross-referenced. "Of course you do," he chuckled. "That's why I called you first." When we hung up, I opened the folder I'd been compiling. I'd already added Trevor's footage, the HOA's newsletter, and scanned images of Lena's medical exemption documents. What I hadn't added yet was the foundation. The part no one in the HOA had taken seriously. The law. I printed out AD Title 2 and 3 statutes, highlighting language about equal access, harassment, and obstruction. Then I added civil restraint precedents and a few state-level cases involving homeowner associations who'd overstepped their authority. I wasn't going to shout this in a meeting. I was going to bury them in procedure. Lena stepped into the room as I was finishing up the labeling on the digital case folder. "You're working the full case, aren't you?" she asked softly. I nodded. "Jacob thinks it's solid. Says they're fast-tracking it for review." She looked down at the floor, then crossed the room and placed her hand on the back of my chair. "I don't want this to become your burden," she said. "You already gave up the badge." I reached up and covered her hand with mine. "I didn't give it up. I changed what it meant." She didn't answer, but she didn't need to. Later that afternoon, I walked the perimeter of our neighborhood, one earbud in, listening to Jacob's instructions while I counted cameras. Dolores had escalated her reach since the chair incident. 6 new surveillance units, all angled toward porches of homeowners she'd cited in recent months, mostly older residents or those with medical signs on their windows. She was targeting the vulnerable. That was her pattern. I took photos of each camera, their mounting points, and the poles they were attached to. A few were secured to public utility fixtures. That was key, because it meant she might have crossed into city property, which gave the state even more cause to intervene. When I got back home, I uploaded the photos, annotated the file paths, and finalized the report. Then I hit send. The email went out to Jacob, to the ADA review board, and, quietly, to one of the local journalists who used to cover my precinct cases. No noise, no broadcast. Just enough light to start warming the shadows. By nightfall, Jacob had replied, "Got it. Solid package. I'll loop you in once we get a response from the state investigator." It was happening, slow, quiet, legal, but happening. Outside, the streetlights flickered on. The new pole-mounted camera near our lot buzzed faintly, its lens turning ever so slightly in its automated pan, like it was watching us sleep. But this time, I wasn't afraid of being seen. Let them watch. Every step I took now had weight behind it. Not just the badge I used to wear, but the network, the law, and the trail of proof Dolores never thought would matter. And she'd given me the final piece herself, on video, wrapped around my wife's wrist. The response came 3 days later. A plain envelope, no return address, but the watermark on the interior page made it official. Office of the Attorney General, Civil Rights Division. It was addressed to me directly, not the HOA. Inside was a formal acknowledgement that the case had been opened under ADA and civil detainment statutes. A preliminary investigator had been assigned. They'd be reaching out within 5 business days. I placed the letter on the table in front of Lena. She read it once, then twice, lips pressed into a tight line. "They're actually doing it," she said, voice low. I nodded. She ran her fingers along the edge of the page. "You think they'll come here? If they don't, I'll invite them myself." She didn't smile. Not yet, but some of the weight in her shoulders loosened. I went outside to clear my head. The air was thick with the kind of heat that made metal too hot to touch. The chair on the porch had absorbed it all, its frame radiating warmth like a brand. Dolores hadn't come by. Again, but I could feel her fingerprints everywhere. Across the street, the Carlsons had replaced their flower beds with synthetic turf. 2 doors down, someone had taken down wind chimes that had hung for over a decade. All silent changes, all within the last week. People weren't complying. They were retreating. That's what scared me more than anything. That Dolores's rule by fear model had worked so well, so quietly, for so long. No one fought back. They just folded. But not this time. I walked down to the community park to clear my head. It was empty, save for a few kids half-heartedly swinging in the heat. The benches were coated with that dry layer of dust that meant no one had been using them. Not lately. I sat anyway. Minutes later, I saw Trevor. He wasn't working this time, just walking the edge of the park, a jug of water in one hand, gloves stuffed in his back pocket. He noticed me, but didn't change course. "Still breathing," he said as he passed. "Barely," I said. He stopped, turned halfway. "They get back to you yet?" "Letter came this morning." He exhaled through his nose and looked out at the rusting monkey bars. "She tried to hire me again. Yesterday, said the fence on lot 12 needed tightening. Did you go?" "No." He hesitated. She waved the clipboard again, said something about obligations. I told her I wasn't a damn code enforcer. "Good," I said. "You're not." He stood quiet for a moment, then said, "I talked to someone." I raised an eyebrow. "Mrs. Holloway. Unit 7. She's had lupus for 20 years. Said Dolores cited her last month for keeping a wheelchair-accessible ramp at the front entrance." I clenched my jaw. "It's her legal right." Trevor nodded. "She filed a complaint. Never heard back. Tell her to check her spam folder, or better, tell her to call Jacob Parr." Civil Rights Division? She's scared. So was Lena. He took that in, then he nodded, more to himself than to me, and walked off without another word. I watched him disappear down the hill toward the west entrance of the neighborhood. That night, I pulled the blinds open wide and let the porch camera blink in full view of the street. I sat beside Lena as she scrolled news articles on her tablet, the recliner humming softly as it adjusted to her back. "You okay?" I asked. "I'm tired of being scared." I nodded. "Me too." A single email landed in my inbox an hour later. The subject line was short. Case investigator assigned, Agent Corley. The body read, "I will be conducting interviews on site in the coming week. Please maintain any existing documentation and avoid contact with the subject of the complaint until review is complete." I clicked reply. "We'll be ready." She won't be. Trevor showed up the next morning with a folder in his hands. No clipboard, no gloves, no landscaping gear. Just a plain manila folder gripped so tightly his knuckles had gone white. He didn't step onto the porch, just stood at the base of the steps, like he wasn't sure he was allowed past the threshold anymore. "I need to give you this," he said. I stood up from the porch chair, slowly. Lena was inside, still resting. The house felt quiet, but it wasn't peaceful. We both knew something had shifted the second I opened the door and saw his face. "What is it?" I asked. Trevor swallowed, looked both ways down the street, then handed the folder up to me. "Everything I've got. Time cards, work orders, texts, the ring footage again, but this time with the timestamp logs attached, and..." her signature. I opened the folder right there. The top sheet was a printed work order for visual uniformity enhancement, perimeter pole installation. The job description matched the locations where the surveillance cameras had appeared. Dolores had signed the bottom with her usual tight slanted cursive. "It proves she directed me," he said, voice low, "and it proves she submitted it as HOA policy without board review. At least not official board review." I flipped further. There were screenshots of text threads. One from a number labeled DP read, "You'll handle the porch chair by noon. Secure the chain, then report it as resolved. HOA backing, full indemnity." Trevor wasn't just giving me evidence. He was testifying. "You sure about this?" I asked. He looked away. "She called my cousin last night. Said I was circulating lies. That if I kept talking, she'd bring up some landscaping violations on lots I serviced last year. Said I breached HOA standards for turf treatment. I felt something cold settle in my chest. "She's starting to get desperate," I said. "Or bold," he replied. I looked down at the folder again, then back at Trevor. He wasn't shaking this time. He was still, grounded, like a man who had finally drawn his own line in the dirt. "Thank you," I said. "You've done the right thing." He nodded once. "I should have done it sooner. Before your wife got caught in the middle of it, I didn't offer him forgiveness. He wasn't asking for it. What he wanted, what he needed, was for this to mean something. And now it would." I spent the next 2 hours scanning every page, saving every file, organizing the new evidence alongside what I'd already sent to Agent Corley. Then I sent him a second packet labeled Supplemental Testimony, Subject Trevor Kane. An auto-reply pinged back immediately. "Received. Will be reviewed in sequence." I knew what that meant. The wheels were turning, slowly, quietly, but turning. That afternoon, I drove to the far end of the neighborhood, the part with the older houses, the ones tucked behind overgrown hedges where the board rarely set foot. I parked near Unit 7 and knocked on Mrs. Holloway's door. She answered in a pale cardigan, leaning slightly on her cane. Her expression was wary, until she saw my face. "You're the one with the porch case," she said. I nodded. "And you're the one with the ramp citation." She gave a tired smile. "It's never about safety. It's about sightlines. I can help file the grievance properly. It won't be ignored this time." She hesitated, then stepped aside. "Come in. I've kept everything I spent the next hour documenting her incident, adding it to the folder, scanning her warning notice. The language matched the one nailed to my porch. Same phrasing, same formatting, same intimidation. By the time I returned home, Lena was sitting on the porch again. The recliner tilted slightly, her legs elevated, eyes closed. She looked peaceful for the first time in days. Trevor had done more than offer evidence. He'd tilted the scale, and tomorrow, when Agent Corley came knocking, I'd have every piece lined up and ready. Let Dolores try to deny it. The truth had names now. The night before Agent Corley's scheduled visit, I spread everything across the dining table like I used to before a case briefing. Documents in rows, images in stacks, timestamps cross-referenced, statements flagged. Not just my own notes now, but Trevor's, Mrs. Holloway's, and a third resident I'd quietly spoken to earlier that day. Mr. Delmar, a stroke survivor whose modified handrails were cited twice in a month under aesthetic inconsistencies. Lena stood behind me with a cup of tea, watching as I worked. "You're back in it," she said. "I never really left," I muttered, scanning the ring cam still frame of Dolores wrapping the chain around our porch railing. "Just change precincts." A soft chime echoed from my laptop. A new email. Subject, final statement of claim preparation, AG review. From Agent Corley. I clicked it open. "Mr. Granger, please ensure that all witness accounts, physical evidence, and HOA correspondence are prepared for interview verification tomorrow. I will begin on-site review at 0900 hours. Be advised, Board President Cheryl Darnell has requested to be present during the session." That name made me pause. "Darnell?" Lena asked. "She's been invisible this whole time," I said. "Letting Dolores run point while she plays neutral." Lena exhaled. "Until now." I turned to her. "That means they're worried. They wouldn't send the president unless they're trying to contain damage." She nodded slowly. "Good." By morning, I dressed in what I used to call my department grays, dark slacks, collared shirt, belt badge tucked in my briefcase for optics, not intimidation. I wanted to look like a man who still knew how to get the job done. At 8:59 a.m., a white sedan with state plates rolled up to our curb. A tall woman in a charcoal blazer stepped out, tablet in one hand, ID badge swinging from her lanyard. Agent Corley. She was younger than I expected, early 30s, sharp eyes, military posture. She approached the porch with no hesitation, eyes scanning everything, chair, siding, camera, steps. "Mr. Granger," she said, "that's me. I'll need access to all ADA citations, footage, testimonies, and HOA documentation you've prepared." I led her inside. An hour passed as she reviewed the files, asked quiet surgical questions. Lena gave her account, voice calm but flat. When it came time to show the footage, Corley leaned in, watching every frame. When Dolores handed Trevor the padlock, she paused the video. "That's more than enough," she said. I didn't ask what came next. At 10:26 a.m., a knock hit the door. Dolores entered first, pressed blazer, hair pinned high, clipboard under her arm like a shield. Behind her, shorter and older, was Cheryl Darnell, the board president, with that rehearsed sterile smile most corporate HR managers wore. "Mr. Granger," Cheryl said, "I understand you've raised concerns." "Allegations," Dolores cut in. Corley raised a hand. "Let's begin." We sat around the table, the folder between us. Corley read out the formal complaint summary, then asked Dolores to explain her actions on the morning Lena was restrained. Dolores didn't even blink. "I merely directed enforcement of visible non-compliance. The chain was symbolic. It was not fastened with intent to restrict movement. You told the contractor to make it look official," I said. "Metaphor," she replied. "Poor choice of words, perhaps." Corley turned to Cheryl. "Were these directives approved by board vote?" Cheryl hesitated, just a flicker, but it was there. "They were informally discussed." "That's not what your bylaws require," Corley said, tapping her tablet. Dolores straightened. "This is being blown out of—" "Ms. Penwright," Corley interrupted, "you installed surveillance units on city utility poles without permit, issued non-compliance threats under ADA protected exemptions, and directed physical action against a disabled resident without board authorization." She closed the folder. "Your defense is no longer administrative. It is now legal." Dolores's lips parted, but no sound came out. Cheryl suddenly looked very pale. Corley stood, turned to me, and said, "We'll proceed from here. I advise no further contact between parties during review." Then she looked back at Dolores and added, "And I suggest you find legal counsel." By the time Agent Corley left, the board's armor had cracked. Cheryl Darnell didn't say a word during her exit. She just avoided eye contact, trailing a few steps behind Dolores like she'd rather be anywhere else. Dolores, for her part, walked stiffly, shoulders square, jaw locked. But even from the window, I could see the slight twitch in her right hand as she clutched her clipboard. The storm had landed, and now it was time to fortify the ground before the next strike. I spent the next day preparing every angle for what came next, not just the legal fallout, but the counter-pressure I knew they'd try to apply in silence. Dolores had already played the fear card with Trevor, and I doubted she was done. So I started building a pressure system of my own. First, I contacted Jacob again. "They'll push back hard now," I said. "Dolores might spin it to the board or start threatening retaliation against the witnesses." "I'll notify our compliance protection team," he replied. "If anyone loses a contract, job, or board standing in relation to this case, it becomes retaliation under whistleblower protection." "Good." Next, I drafted a formal HOA membership rights notification and slipped it into the mailboxes of every resident on our block. It wasn't an accusation, just a concise breakdown of ADA regulations, civil detainment boundaries, and the right to request third-party review for HOA decisions. I kept it clean, sourced, and calm. But I made sure the final line stood out. Silence is not safety. Compliance is not immunity. Within 24 hours, 3 neighbors reached out, 2 by phone, 1 by handwritten letter. They shared stories, small things mostly. Decorative planters removed without notice, fines issued for handrails, citations for ramps, walkers, even therapy dog signage. No one had spoken out. No one had dared, until now. The story had reached them through whispers, they said. And the footage, though I hadn't posted it publicly, was already making rounds through private texts. A still image of Lena in the chair, Dolores holding the chain. Nothing more, nothing less. I didn't leak it, but I didn't stop it either. That image was doing what I couldn't. It was making people feel something. I took it a step further, reached out to a civil liberties lawyer I trusted, Maya Durant, formerly of the same precinct legal group I'd worked with during my detective years. She was fast, sharp, and surgical. "Send me the footage and all associated correspondence," she said. "I'll flag anything that crosses into federal risk exposure. Think it's strong enough to push further? If this goes public," she said, "and it will if it escalates, the state won't be the only ones knocking." While Maya reviewed the legal boundaries, I met with Mrs. Holloway again. We sat in her living room as she handed me her updated statement, printed neatly on yellow-lined paper. "I spoke to my daughter about it," she said. "She was furious. Told me I should have reported that woman years ago." "You did," I said gently. "They just didn't listen." She placed her hand over mine. "Make them listen now." Back at home, I compiled the new testimonies into structured folders, labeling each by source, date, and category of abuse. Ramp citations, porch surveillance, unauthorized enforcement actions. I even included a few anonymous tips neighbors slipped into my mailbox. Handwritten notes about Dolores entering private yards with a EUIZIPA phone in hand, photographing people's outdoor setups without consent. Every data point sharpened the case, but it also did something else. It built momentum. And that was the thing Dolores never accounted for. People may fear alone, but they rise in numbers. Lena noticed it too. She pointed out how neighbors who used to look away now nodded when we walked past. How Trevor had returned to work with his chin a little higher. How even the porch felt less exposed. "They're waiting," she said. "For what?" "For the moment this goes from quiet justice to something everyone sees." I nodded and opened the folder one last time. The preparation phase was over. The final moves were ready. The morning of the board meeting arrived without a whisper from Dolores. No emails, no last-minute notices. Not even a veiled threat slipped under the door. Just silence. The kind that drips with calculation. She knew the next few hours would decide everything, and for once, she wasn't the one holding the narrative. But I was. The meeting was scheduled for 7 p.m. at the Maple Glen Community Center, a beige-paneled hall with long fluorescent lights and folding chairs stacked against the walls. It usually hosted craft nights and neighborhood potlucks. But tonight, the room would hold something sharper. Truth with teeth. By mid-afternoon, I'd already checked my submission list twice. Jacob confirmed the AG team would be monitoring the outcome through the legal portal. Maya had drafted 2 restraining clause requests in case the board tried to suppress public comment. And Lena, she printed out the photo, not the whole video, just one frame, Dolores looping the chain, her face tilted with that condescending little smile she always wore like armor. Lena placed it in a plain folder, no label, no speech. She just said, "Let them look me in the eye after this." I kissed her forehead. They won't be able to. By 6:30, the parking lot was half full. Neighbors arrived in clusters, some quiet, others buzzing with rumor. A few older couples nodded at me with eyes full of cautious hope. Mrs. Holloway was already seated near the front, cane beside her, mouth pressed tight like she'd rehearsed 100 comebacks and decided none were necessary. Trevor showed up 5 minutes later, wearing a clean shirt and no hat for the first time. He didn't speak, just gave me a small nod and took a seat along the side wall. Then, at 6:57, Dolores walked in. No clipboard this time, just a slim binder tucked under her arm, and a look on her face like the air itself was beneath her. She didn't look at anyone, didn't acknowledge a single nod or greeting, and Cheryl Darnell followed a step behind, pale and grim as ever. They took their seats at the center table, pretending the room wasn't already electric. At exactly 7 o'clock, Cheryl banged the small gavel. "This board meeting is now in session. Tonight's agenda includes a review of current HOA compliance, procedures, an open comment session regarding community security measures, and administrative updates. Safe, sterile, scripted." I stood. Cheryl blinked mid-sentence. "I have a formal submission for the record," I said. documented under the Civil Rights Division case number, assigned to Agent Corley, currently under review. A few gasps sounded from the back. Cheryl adjusted her glasses. Mr. Granger, we are not... I placed the folder on the table. This includes visual evidence, sworn witness testimony, and signed HOA correspondence implicating Ms. Penwright in a pattern of unlawful conduct, including unauthorized surveillance, abuse of power, and civil detainment of a disabled resident. Dolores opened her mouth. I cut in. You chained my wife to our railing. On camera, in front of a witness you later tried to silence, then issued fines under fabricated codes and claimed enforcement rights you don't have. The room went still. Someone shifted in a chair. Another cleared their throat. You've weaponized policy, Dolores, but policy doesn't shield you from federal law. Cheryl looked toward the back door like it might swing open and rescue her. It didn't. I pulled the still image from the folder and turned it to the crowd. Just one picture. One moment, frozen in time. Lena's face visible. Dolores's hand mid-motion. The chain glinting in the light. This, I said, is the standard your board has allowed. Not enforced. Allowed, I didn't yell. Didn't need to. I looked around the room and saw it. Heads nodding, spines straightening. People who had once folded, now finding the crease wasn't as permanent as they thought. The real confrontation hadn't been a scene. It had been a quiet build-up, a record made complete. And now, all that was left was judgment. The silence after I laid the photo down didn't last long. Not because anyone spoke, but because the image did all the talking. A few rows back, someone let out a quiet breath, like they'd been holding it for days. The HOA secretary, a young woman I hadn't seen speak once in prior meetings, leaned forward slowly in her chair, eyes locked on Dolores. For the first time in every encounter we'd had, Dolores didn't have a response. She didn't lunge for the photo. She didn't deny it was her. She just sat there, jaw tight, shoulders too stiff to look confident. Across from her, Cheryl cleared her throat. The gavel still rested at her fingertips, but her hand didn't move. Mr. Granger, she said, voice brittle, this forum wasn't intended to address active investigations. Then it shouldn't have required one to begin with, I replied. Murmurs echoed around the room, neighbors shifting in their seats, eyes scanning each other like they were recalibrating the entire foundation of what they had assumed HOA authority meant. Cheryl looked around, then back at me. Are you requesting a board response tonight? No, I said. I'm requesting the board recuse itself from all enforcement decisions pending the outcome of the AG investigation. That includes compliance fines, surveillance authorization, and architectural citations. And if we decline, I turned slightly and gestured toward the back of the room. Agent Corley stood in the doorway. She hadn't entered earlier, but she'd been there, watching from the hall, as legally allowed under state transparency statutes. Now she stepped inside with a clipboard of her own, a badge lanyard clearly visible, and a stack of printed papers tucked under her arm. The Office of the Attorney General advises that any board action taken tonight in contradiction to the active civil rights review may be interpreted as obstruction, she said calmly, addressing the board and no one else. Cheryl looked like someone had yanked the oxygen out of her lungs. Her hand finally moved, but not to the gavel. It dropped into her lap, limp. Dolores, however, had one last move. This is a smear campaign, she said sharply. You all think this is about a chair. A chair. He's a former officer with connections. He's exploiting the law to take down a volunteer board. No one moved, so she stood. None of you have any idea how hard I've worked to keep this neighborhood clean. Consistent. You think that happens by itself? You think unity means letting people do whatever they want? You chained someone, Dolores, Trevor's voice cut through from the side wall. Everyone turned. He stepped forward, slow and steady, then pointed at the board table. I heard you say it. I watched you do it. You handed me the lock. Dolores stared at him, the color draining from her face. I lost work for telling the truth, he continued, and I did it anyway. Because this place only survives if we stop pretending fear is leadership. Another voice rose, Mrs. Holloway. I have a ramp. I was fined. My daughter built that ramp after I fell down 3 stairs and spent a week in the hospital. You fined me for safety. Then another. Mr. Delmar. They threatened to remove my railing. Claimed it didn't match the paint code. Lena stood at the back of the room, not speaking, but not invisible. Everyone saw her. Everyone knew. That image on the table was burned into their minds now. Cheryl finally lifted the gavel. The board will temporarily suspend all enforcement actions pending investigation. Dolores spun toward her. You're just going to give in? No, Cheryl whispered. I'm going to stop before this gets worse. Dolores's mouth opened, but no words came. Agent Corley approached the table and placed an envelope in front of her. You'll be contacted for a formal deposition. Legal representation is advised. Dolores sat down again, heavily, like someone had pulled the strings out of her back. The meeting adjourned 5 minutes later. No applause, no shouting. Just a slow, collective exhale, like someone had cracked a window in a house that had been locked for years. 2 weeks later, the cameras were gone. Every one of them, ripped down from utility poles, fences, lamp posts. The HOA sent out an official notice blaming a vendor compliance issue. But everyone knew it wasn't about wiring. It was about Dolores. She resigned the day after her deposition. Quietly, no statement, no apology. Just a one-sentence email to the board and a phone call to her lawyer. The board president, Cheryl, stayed on, though not for long. At the next emergency meeting, she voted to dissolve the current enforcement committee and open it to resident elections. I didn't run. I didn't need to. Lena's chair still sat on the porch, only now it was surrounded by planters, gifts from neighbors who once feared fines for hanging wind chimes or painting shutters off pallet. One woman dropped off a ceramic turtle with the words, "No more chains." It was ugly and perfect, but what changed the most wasn't visible. It was the silence, not the strained, fearful kind, the peaceful kind, the kind that made you realize you could open a window again without watching your back. Lena came outside more often now. She didn't flinch at every car or stare at the curb waiting for another clipboard. She just sat in that chair, legs up, blanket tucked around her, eyes closed like she was finally letting her body heal in more ways than one. I sat beside her that afternoon when the letter came, stamped from the office of the Attorney General, addressed to both of us. Lena opened it. Inside was a formal resolution notice. This investigation has concluded with sufficient findings to substantiate civil rights violations and ADA non-compliance by the former HOA enforcement agent Dolores Penwright. Community oversight reforms have been recommended. No further action is required from the complainant. She handed it to me, but I didn't need to read it again. I already knew what it said. It said, "You were right to fight back, and you weren't alone." I leaned back in the chair, the wood creaking gently beneath me. Across the street, Trevor was fixing a loose plank on a neighbor's porch. He caught my eye and gave a quiet nod. No words, just respect. Behind him, the community bulletin board had a new post. Neighborhood Bylaws Open Forum, residents welcome. It hadn't been there before. We didn't just win, we changed the rules. Lena reached over and took my hand. Her fingers were steady now. No tremble, no hesitation. "You ever think we'd get here?" she asked. "Not like this," I said. "Not this fast." She smiled. "Fast?" I chuckled. "All right, not fast. But full circle." She leaned her head against my shoulder. "Feels like home again." It did. Not because the house changed, not because the lawn was perfect or the paint matched some code, but because the weight was gone. And sometimes that's all you need. I looked out at the street, the sidewalks, the porches. I wondered how many people had stayed silent in other neighborhoods. How many Dolorees were still out there, cloaked in authority, hiding behind clipboards and codes. If you're still watching and you've ever been there, if someone tried to shrink your voice with rules they made up, know this: you're not alone. And the moment you push back with truth, with law, with evidence, they lose the thing they fear most: control. If you want more stories of homeowners standing up to HOA tyranny, hit subscribe right now, share your story in the comments, and let me know where you're watching from.